So we're all very well trained to not move, right? But if you had been just sitting for 10 minutes, like imagine how many times you might have, and why. You know, it might have just been to scratch an itch. Or I found myself sweaty and I wanted to do this a couple times, you know, just to alleviate the minor Sankhara dukkha, right? Do you know the word Sankhara dukkha? The 3 types of dukkha. So there's dukkha dukkha, which is dukkha of the mind, dukkha of thoughts and physical pain. There's vipariyana dukkha, which is the dukkha of impermanence, like not liking things changing. And then sankhara dukkha is sort of that idea around just discomfort. How, you know, that feeling when you wake up in the morning and you're just kind of in a bad mood, but you don't really have a reason or why, but you'll sort of manipulate your whole day to try not to have to feel the minor discomforts. And so what Ajahn Nev is pointing to here is, you know, obviously, like, take care of yourself. It doesn't mean not to go to the bathroom. It doesn't mean not to eat. It doesn't mean, but how many times do we manipulate situations and living just to get out of slight discomforts or discomfort instead of sitting with, being with. And so this is a big part of what the Thai forest tradition was about. There was like, sila was a big part of the practice, the ethical practice, but it was mostly about, formal sitting periods were important, but every moment of awareness, of being, of paying attention, of living, of functioning was what the Thai forest tradition really pointed to, more than anything. What else do I want to say about that? Yeah, striving, not a big thing. So again, back to this whole jhana idea, like striving, reaching, attaining, not talked about. If anything, like I said, kind of put down. It was really just about living in nature, being one with, paying attention. That was a big part of the Thai forest. Living very simply, renunciation, all that kind of thing. And then Wat Pah Pong, I think, was the monastery that was first built amongst the cobras and the tigers, and then Wat Pah Nanachat is what's still there now, which Ajahn Sumedho started in Thailand, and people, you can all still go there now and practice in the. Has anybody been to Wat Pah Nanachat? And practice? You have?
I've been up there,
Yeah, cool. What did you have? Yeah, you've been to Thailand a few times, huh? Yeah. So, I don't know, any questions, thoughts on that? That to me, the Thai forest tradition feels really natural to me. Like that feels very much like my practice. But it took me hearing about it and learning about it to know that. Like I was already practicing in that way. And then once I heard about it, then I went, oh, yeah, this is what I've been doing. You know, sometimes it can go both ways, right? Where we'll learn something and do it. And then other times we've been doing something and then it makes sense that that's the tradition that we follow or fall into. And so for me, the Thai forest tradition feels very natural. And my deep concentrated states come not from trying, but from just a sustained attention in everything. And then I find myself maybe even in jhana, but not through trying to be concentrated, or right? So that to me feels really natural. And so we're going to come into contact with people who, you know, might be at odds with a way that we're teaching meditation or training. And I don't know where you lie in that, and I'm curious because I understand when we would say, no, we're actually doing this right now. I get that also. Yeah, what would you say about that? Like if something doesn't feel right to somebody.
What I mostly say is that the reason I teach the progress of insight in Mahasi is because that's my experience.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So actually I say the same thing that you just said.
Yeah, yeah.
And that there are lots of maps, and that you need to find a map that you relate to without a lot of transliteration. That's
Yeah.
about
Transliteration meaning like
it. That you have to
confusion
adjust it
and
so that it matches.
Yeah, okay.
The less adjusting, the better. I mean, my experience just laid out pretty much the way the progress of insight is laid out. I didn't have
Yeah.
to change anything.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's important to know. Yeah.
About the technique you just did. So in a technique like that, are you just basing your attention then on the arising of the impulse to move? You're just watching, you're observing your process around this move, but you're not necessarily doing anything with that awareness.
Right. Well, your awareness is your object,
Okay.
right? So it's different than having an object, even being a sensory object. Awareness is your object. So that's where the sustained attention can come, and that's where the concentration can come, is through the sustained awareness, but it's not because it's placed on any one thing. So yeah, the continuity is in following and paying attention to change, anicca. Really paying attention to anicca. And then this is where the three characteristics show up in a big way, is when awareness is the object, then we can see the non-attachment to a self or anything permanent.
So I found myself in that making a decision first when my eyes closed to count involuntary or so perceived involuntary movement. And I had, at the end when the bell rang, I had 316 little shifts, like interior shifts and external shifts occur. Plus the idea of counting each one. I figure makes it 632.
Yeah, and part of that is because you've probably been conditioned in your practice to note or count or watch, right? So that makes sense that that's what arises. When, Christine, when you said that when you went on a Otejaniya retreat, was it you? And you were totally discombobulated? I felt that way on my first Otejaniya retreat, because what Otejaniya is basically, even though he's Burmese, he's basically teaching choiceless awareness, was that I didn't know how to not have something to land on. It felt very groundless to me and very disorienting when I first did it. And that's like the interesting thing about like true Vipassana practice is we're not actually landing on anything. We're not going back to the breath as our object. We're not going back to the body as our object. We're not going like having one anchor, which a lot of us have been trained to do for years, right? And then so when we're asked to have nothing as your anchor, just awareness is your anchor, it's very wild. It's super fucking hard to do. So I totally got it when you said that in your check-in. So yeah, I mean, that's why it's interesting how the conditioning in our practice gets so much so that when we try something else, we feel out of sorts. Because why I think it's good to have a practice and learn how to really explore it, and it's really good to shake it up. It's really good to work your edge, because when we have to work our edge out there, and we're like, but I gotta count, or I gotta, whatever. It's like, wait, trying to avoid an argument, gotta count first, or whatever. It's like, it's really good to work the edge a little bit. Yeah.
I have a hard time personally
Yeah.
reconciling how in cultures, and I guess probably in this conversation, that balance of it's okay to work the edge here,
Yeah.
but then striving is something that's kind of generally frowned upon. And then a lot of times pointing at as an example of striving is like jhanas and using that as something to work towards. feels,
Wait, say more. So you're saying like working the edge. So working the edge meaning trying something new.
okay.
Not necessarily like not striving, but we're trying something different in practice, because if we go back to this idea of 80,000 different skillful means, right, there's probably something we haven't tried yet, is my guess. And if we get just to the first path factor of right view, which ultimately is not holding any view, it's like, it's wise to see where our views are solid, and that might be in how we sit. It might be in how we're practicing. So yeah, when I say edge, I don't mean like sharp edge. I mean just doing something different. So that might be taking, you know, like Mo was pointing to, right speech has been her practice lately. It might be saying, okay, I'm going to practice with something that I don't typically practice with. And so what I feel like the sort of the Cha, Tudong, that lineage, and again, this is a view. It's a way of practicing. It's a way of practicing with a lot of space. I don't know if that even speaks to your comment.
Oh, yeah,
But-
that clarifies that distinction.
Yeah.
The minute you started describing this and you closed your eyes, I was excited to be doing it, because I have the experience when I go out of my normal, that it shows me how much the way mind is happening and the way experience presents is a result of the way I'm practicing. Like the way that the mind thinks, the way that sense experiences happen, it all kind of seems like it becomes fabricated by the method of practice.
Yeah.
And doing something like this really illuminated that. It was actually really deep, and it's so bizarre for me to practice this way. But it often happens like this, and when I talk to people who practice in other ways, especially if I'm trying to help them, like in a mentoring relationship, I'll often kind of try to put on their practice to see what it's like for them. And the same experience happens. It's like there's an insight in how much of what I started to think was just reality happening was the subjective view of reality of the way I practice.
Yeah, it's cool. I mean, this is when we look at the aggregate of perception, right? Like, oftentimes I think what it would be like to have somebody else's mind in mind for a day. What would that be like? You know, just for a day to live with somebody else's mind. And I'm just wanting to point to, and again, like I said, I don't know merely as much as I would like to know about this, and I want to, but how much possibility there is in the practice. It's very expansive. And if we think about it, I love to just put myself in the body of a Tudong monk and imagine sitting under a tree and having no protection, no food, no ground, you know, it's just like the clothes I'm wearing, the bowl I have, that's it, every single day. And what would that do to the mind? You know, what could we let go of? And what, you know, it's just, I just find it fascinating the way that they practice. And I'll probably never do it in my life, maybe someday, but.
I was in a Thai monastery, and Ajahn Tom, I think Larry started with him there, and he had a really strange method that I've never heard or seen before. So we would, we had to cool down for a few days. It was just breath practice, right? But every day when we went to report to the monk.
Can you talk a little bit louder? I'm having a hard time hearing.
Yeah, every day when we had to report to the monk, he had this like almost like a medical body specimen, you know, like one of those plastic medical bodies.
Like a skeleton?
No, not a skeleton. You know, the white plastic
Okay.
and with pins all over it, like a voodoo doll. And I'm always going like, what is this? body doing that, right? But we didn't. Anyway, and then the day came and he said, okay, now you're ready to practice. And he gave us one point on the body, which was in the back, you know? And then we had to like intensely focus on it, intensely focus on it, and it would come a light. It was like a flame, right? And then he gave us the next point, and so we had to just go through all the specific points that he had on the body, and that was a meditation. Now, I didn't stay until the end, so I don't know if there was anything more to it, but that's what we did.
Yeah, so it was first foundation, it was body parts, right? He was having you go through.
Yeah, but it was like the mind, you know, the mind controlling, like the mind lighting up each spot. So I'm not quite, so that's not quite a
Yeah.
foundation, you know?
Yeah. No, it's so, and this is what's important. So this is good, right? So this is a Thai forest monastery, and they were doing that, right? So like the idea that we could say this is Buddhism. People get really creative with the way they teach and what they do, right? And so I don't know who that was, but who did you say? It was
Kong. He
Kong.
has a big, I mean, in Chiang Mai, there's that big, it's like the Srigadon of Chiang Mai.
Yeah.
He has his monastery there, and then he has one on the outskirts of Chiang Mai.
Yeah. So you could think you're going to Thailand and getting a Thai monk, right? And then be getting this thing that, so I'm just wanting to,
Was that not considered Taiwan?
well, he's in Thailand, but I'm just saying he's not a Thai forest monk, right?
Well,
And you could get, like, what I'm trying to say is we can't define any one practice as being anything, right? What were you going to say?
When I generally do the choiceless awareness, I love Ajahn Chah's simplicity of letting it go.
Yeah.
You know, and like when people come back to him or you hear stories, like they, you know, their body broke apart and into light, and he would be like, well, good, another
Yeah.
thing to let go. Right? So I love that simplicity, and that's very much how I practice. And then I went on a 10-day with another Thai forest, Khan Jeff, completely different. Right? 32 body parts.
32 parts, yeah.
All day.
Right.
You know? And so, yeah, like Thai forest, but
Yeah.
completely different methods.
So he's Thai, but not necessarily forest. Like Tong Jep, I don't think was ever a Tudong.
Study under Boa.
Right, but I don't know if he was ever Tudong. So when we use Thai, so just for clarification, the Thai forests are the ones who do not live in a monastery, right? They're the wandering.
Okay.
And then the Thai, which Cha started the first
Yeah.
like monastery, but exactly to the point, right?
Well, when I
Like, you
went there,
don't
I showed up
know.
at IMS, and I'm kind of new to the practice
Right.
too.
You thought,
I'm
yeah.
practicing this way, and I was like, wow,
Yeah, yeah.
intense.
And so if we get super rigid and thinking, no, this is meditation. I know meditation. No, we're going to be blown apart, and that's why it's good to have different teachers, so that we can keep letting go, keep letting go, keep letting go, keep letting go. And I'm going to criticize that by saying it's also important to have a system for a while. I sort of feel like once we've been practicing for a long enough period of time, we can move into the keep letting go and moving around. I think it's really good for newer students that you're working with to have one thing that they can reliably count on until sustainability happens, right? We really need to, I think, now not all people point to this, Sumedho thinks that nobody ever needs to have a breath awareness practice ever, that you start right away with choiceless awareness. That's what Ajahn Sumedho thinks. U Tejaniya. He thinks that it's a mistake to ever teach anybody to count on any one anchor at the beginning of their practice. I keep pointing to you because I know you're going to Sri
Have
Min.
this conversation too.
Yeah. So I'm sorry I keep pointing at you, but that's what he thinks, that that's a mistake. So
And, with Shinzen, he there's no anchor.
There's no anchor,
There's
ever, like from the beginning.
He'll say like start somewhere, but then you can switch 2 minutes later and then eventually.
Yeah, that's really hard for me.
Yeah,
I've been practicing 20 years.
Anchor on anything.
He'll
So
say,
limit the
yeah, the
focus.
focus range.
Yeah, that's different than an anchor.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, it's hard for me not to have somewhere to start. I still, 25 years later, need to have somewhere to start. So again, but that gets to be my choice, right? And so when I'm practicing with somebody, this is the ehipasago part. See for yourself. We really do need to see for ourselves what our practice is and if it's working. To alleviate suffering, like that's what we're doing. Like if that's what's happening, cool. So anyway, again, I'm gonna go back to, so that was the Thai forest. I know that you guys have been studying Mahasi, so there might be stuff, if I say stuff that's wrong, because my information might be outdated. One of the things that I really like about the Burmese tradition is it has a bit of an activist social justice bent on it, because Buddhism was dying, you know, it really was, and war and colonialism and all these things were really taking out Buddhism. And so, what year was it? I mean, it was basically in the 50s for the most part. 1840 was when Ledi Sayadaw was born. In 1885 was when the British had come in and said, we want, Buddhism can stay, but it's going to be secular, right? So we're going to take out the statues, we're going to take out the bowing, we're going to take out any of that stuff. You can still meditate, you can still practice, but it's going to be secular. And so Ledi Sayadaw said, no, actually, we're going to do the opposite, and we're going to make this a total revival. And what that means is we're going to bring lay people into the scene. Because what they were taking out was monastics and monasteries. Nobody practiced other than monastics before this period in Burma. There was, like I said, there was the lay version of practice, but it had nothing to do with retreat. I mean, the fact that we're sitting retreats is really a big deal, right? Like lay people did not sit retreats for 2,000 years, 2,500 years. So Ledi Sayadaw said, we're not going to let this colonialism take over. We're going to revive Buddhism. And the way we're going to do it is by bringing lay people in and involving them and creating places for them to come and places for them to retreat and places for them to practice. And so that was like a big turning point for Buddhism. And Ledi Sayadaw was Mahasi Sayadaw's teacher, and then U Pandita also. And then Goenka also came out of that tradition. But this was when the way we practice now was created. And so what Mahasi's, the reason why Mahasi got so precise was because us dense lay people needed, who weren't living the multiple Vinaya precepts and who weren't living in monasteries and who weren't renunciates and ascetics, needed to have very core practice models. And so people would go and they would do 16 hours a day of practice in the monasteries, lay people. And it had to be super precise, and they were super strict. And it was, it was definitely the not eating afternoon, and it was 16 hours of sitting and walking. And this is when the noting practice, when Mahasi Sayadaw came up with the noting practice. And so the noting, again, this doesn't have a precise anchor. The noting is landing and watching. The rising and the falling of the breath is a big part of it. So watching the rising and the falling. But the anchor, as you know, is whatever is happening as it's happening and noting that it's happening. Right?
I realized that was the distinction with Shinzen is that he'll load the focus range, but it's Wild West.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's Wild West, right. So as it said, Mahasi starts with insight right away. It does not start with concentration. So again, it sort of points to like the cha thing, right? It's following, but there is an object. There is an object that is being pointed to every moment that you notice it. even if there's nothing happening, you're noting nothing happening, right? If there's, so all of it, if there's intention, so before something happens, you're noting there's the intention for the something to happen. And then you're noting thinking about the something happening. And then you're noting the action of the something happening. And so it's a constant stream of noting. Which is crazy
Not as
making.
horrifying as you think.
Oh my God, to me that is crazy making. So Mahasi Sayadaw, and then Uba Khin was one of his students, and Goenka was the student of Uba Khin. And then Goenka is kind of who a lot of people attribute bringing Vipassana to the West. And the sort of classic 10-day silent retreat wasn't really happening here before Goenka. As much shit as he gets. And then so much, right? And then also Munindra, who said they've said a ton of Goenka? Who was just saying, oh, it was somebody in my other 11 o'clock. Nobody here, okay.
I did one.
Huh?
It was my
One.
first retreat.
It was?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot of people's first retreat.
Yeah.
You've been to 3. Have you been since you've been practicing insight or was yeah?
Yeah, I did Shinzen was my first retreat when I did 3.
And would you do a Goenka retreat now?
You know, what I like about those retreats is that they're very intensive.
Intense, yeah.
And there's not a lot of bullshit. And
Yeah.
It's a good place to go practice.
Yeah,
But if you need instruction beyond what's on the videotape,
yeah,
forget it.
yeah,
Yeah.
Talk about it.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, I would agree.
You reminded me of Bela Lugosi.
Oh my God.
Work diligently.
And then who had deep